The meteorite struck the Earth somewhere in the Arizona Territory 3 weeks before Gabriel Garrison found it. And when he pulled the stone from the scorched crater outside Taylorsville, he knew his life was about to change forever. Gabriel had been tracking falling stars since he was 18 years old, watching the night sky from his homestead near the Colorado border, mapping their trajectories and riding out at dawn to find what heaven had cast down. Now, at 26, he had built a modest reputation among collectors back east as the man who could find what others only dreamed about. His hands were calloused from the rains and the pickaxe, his face weathered by the relentless sun, but his eyes held the wonder of someone who still believed in miracles written in fire across the darkness. The rock was roughly the size of a watermelon, its surface pitted and scarred from its violent descent through the atmosphere. Gabriel wrapped it carefully in canvas and loaded it onto his pack horse, consulting the letter he had received 2 months prior. The correspondence had come from Taylorsville, a growing town in the Arizona Territory that had sprung up around the copper mines. A collector there, someone named Victoria Jennings, had heard of his work and wanted to acquire specimens for what the letter described as a private scientific collection. The payment offered was generous enough to fund Gabriel's searches for the next year. The ride to Taylorsville took 4 days through terrain that shifted from pine-covered mountains to red rock desert. Gabriel traveled with his 2 horses, his bedroll, and the precious cargo that represented his livelihood. He had expected many things when he finally rode down the dusty main street of Taylorsville on that scorching afternoon in July of 1883. But he had not expected Victoria Jennings to be a woman. She stood on the porch of a large adobe building at the edge of town, shading her eyes against the brilliant sun as he approached. Gabriel's first thought was that she must be waiting for someone else, perhaps the actual collector, but when he dismounted and asked a passing merchant where he might find Victoria Jennings, the man pointed directly at her. "That would be Miss Victoria Jennings right there," the merchant said. "Owns the whole building. Does all sorts of science work inside." Gabriel felt his assumptions crumble as he led his horses toward the porch. Victoria Jennings was perhaps 24 or 25, with auburn hair pulled back in a practical bun and intelligent green eyes that studied him with the same intensity he usually reserved for his celestial finds. She wore a simple but well-made dress in deep blue, with an apron that bore what looked like chalk dust and mineral stains. "Mr. Garrison, I presume." Her voice was clear and educated, with an East Coast accent that marked her as a transplant to the territory. "Yes, madam." "I have the specimen you requested." Gabriel found himself standing straighter, suddenly aware of how rough he must look after days on the trail. "Excellent. Please, bring it inside where we can examine it properly." She held the door open, and Gabriel caught the scent of her perfume, something floral that seemed impossibly delicate in this harsh landscape. The interior of the building was a revelation. Where Gabriel had expected perhaps a curiosity shop or a simple study, he found instead a fully equipped laboratory. Tables lined the walls, covered with rock samples, scientific instruments, and detailed charts of the heavens. Shelves held books on astronomy, geology, and chemistry. A large telescope stood near the window, pointed at the sky. "This is remarkable," Gabriel said, momentarily forgetting the meteorite still wrapped on his packhorse outside. Victoria smiled, and it transformed her serious face into something luminous. "My father was a professor of natural philosophy at Harvard. He taught me to look at the world with curious eyes. When he passed, 2 years ago, he left me his fortune and his passion for understanding the universe. I came west because the skies are clearer here, the specimens less picked over. I am sorry for your loss. Gabriel meant it. He understood the bond between a parent and child united by wonder. Thank you. Now, shall we see what you have brought me? Gabriel retrieved the meteorite and carefully unwrapped it on the examination table Victoria indicated. As the canvas fell away, revealing the pitted black surface of the stone, he watched her face light up with genuine excitement. She leaned close, producing a magnifying glass from her apron pocket, studying the fusion crust with the focus of a true scientist. "It is beautiful," she murmured. "Still relatively fresh. The oxidation has barely begun." Her fingers traced the surface with a tenderness that made Gabriel's chest tighten in an unexpected way. "Where did you find it?" "About 60 miles northeast of here. I tracked its fall pattern from my homestead near the Colorado line." The impact crater was fresh, probably no more than a month old. Victoria looked up at him, and their eyes met across the table. "You witnessed the fall itself?" "I saw the bolide, yes. The fireball lit up the whole sky around midnight on June 15th. I started riding at first light and reached the impact site by the morning of the 17th. That is dedication." She straightened, still holding his gaze. "Most of the so-called dealers I have encountered simply purchase stones from farmers or steal them from university collections. You are the genuine article, Mr. Garrison. Gabriel, please, and I only bring authentic falls. I would not know how to live with myself otherwise. Then you must call me Victoria." She turned back to the meteorite, producing a small hammer and chisel. "May I take a sample?" "I will pay extra, of course." "It is your stone now, Miss Jennings. You may do as you wish." "Victoria," she corrected gently. "If I am to call you Gabriel." He nodded, watching as she carefully chipped a small fragment from the meteorite's surface. Her movements were precise and confident. Everything about her spoke of competence and intelligence, qualities that Gabriel found himself drawn to with startling intensity. He had known her less than an hour, and yet something had shifted in his world, as definite as the moment a meteorite strikes the earth. Victoria prepared a slide and moved to a microscope near the window. As she peered through the lens, adjusting the focus, Gabriel found himself studying her profile, the way concentration creased her brow, the graceful line of her neck. He forced himself to look away, reminding himself that he was here on business, nothing more. "This is a chondrite," Victoria announced, stepping back from the microscope. "You can see the chondrules clearly, these small spherical structures. They are among the oldest materials in the solar system, formed before the planets themselves." Her enthusiasm was infectious. "Do you understand what that means, Gabriel? You are holding something older than the Earth." "I know what they are," he said quietly. "That is why I search for them. Every specimen is a message from the beginning of everything." Victoria's expression softened. "Yes, exactly yes." She moved closer to him, and he caught that floral scent again. "So few people understand. They see rocks, curiosities, perhaps a quick profit. They do not see the poetry." "There is poetry in the heavens," Gabriel agreed. "I have watched meteor showers that looked like the sky was weeping fire. I have found stones buried so deep in the earth that I had to dig for 2 days straight to free them. Each one is a gift." "You are not what I expected," Victoria said, studying his face with that same intense focus she had given the meteorite. "Nor are you," Gabriel admitted. "When I saw the name V. Jennings, I assumed that I would be a man," she laughed, a warm sound that filled the laboratory. "Most people do. It has proven useful in correspondence. Dealers are more honest with their prices when they think they are dealing with a male colleague. That is clever. That is necessary." Some of the warmth left her voice. "The scientific community is not welcoming to women, even those with means and education. Here in Taylorsville, I can pursue my studies without the constant battles I faced back east. The townspeople think me eccentric, perhaps, but they leave me to my work." Gabriel understood isolation. His own passion had set him apart from others his age, who could not fathom why he would spend weeks alone in the wilderness chasing rocks from the sky. It can be lonely, following a calling others do not share. "Yes," Victoria said softly, "it can." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the meteorite between them on the table, a piece of the cosmos that had somehow brought them together. Gabriel knew he should collect his payment and return to his searching, but he found himself reluctant to leave. "I have 3 more specimens," he heard himself say. "Smaller pieces but authenticated falls. I could bring them by tomorrow if you would like to examine them." Victoria's face brightened. "I would like that very much. In fact, why do not you join me for dinner this evening? There is a respectable boarding house where I take my meals. The food is adequate, and we could discuss your methods of tracking meteorite falls. I have been relying on reports from ranchers and miners, but your system sounds far more scientific." "I would be honored," Gabriel said, and meant it. That evening, cleaned up and wearing his best shirt, Gabriel met Victoria at the boarding house. The proprietor, a kind-faced widow named Mrs. Palmer, served them roasted chicken and vegetables while casting approving glances between them. Over the meal, Gabriel described his techniques for predicting impact sites based on the angle and velocity of the observed bolide. Victoria, in turn, shared her research into the chemical composition of different meteorite types and her theory that they represented fragments from various celestial bodies. "The asteroids between Mars and Jupiter," she explained, her eyes bright with passion for her subject. "I believe most meteorites are pieces of these bodies, shattered by collisions and sent wandering through space until they encounter Earth's gravity. That would explain the variations in composition," Gabriel mused. "I have found iron meteorites so pure they ring like bells when struck, and others that are almost entirely stone." "Exactly," Victoria leaned forward. "Each one is a sample from a different parent body. If we could gather enough specimens and catalog their properties, we might map the very composition of the asteroid belt itself." They talked until the other diners had left, and Mrs. Palmer began pointedly clearing tables around them. Gabriel could not remember the last time he had enjoyed someone's company so thoroughly. Victoria listened with genuine interest to his stories of lonely nights under the stars and long searches across unforgiving terrain. She understood the pull of the unknown, the deep satisfaction of discovery. As they walked back toward Victoria's laboratory in the cooling desert evening, Gabriel felt the weight of impending departure. "I should head out tomorrow," he said, though every part of him protested the idea. "There are more meteorites to find, and the summer months are best for travel." Victoria stopped walking, turning to face him in the dimness. The moon was rising, casting silver light across her features. "Must you go so soon? I meant what I said about wanting to see your other specimens, and I—" She hesitated, a vulnerability showing through her usual confidence. "I have enjoyed today very much. It is rare to meet someone who truly understands this passion." "I have enjoyed it as well," Gabriel admitted, "more than I can properly express. Then stay a few days. Let me examine the specimens you mentioned. We could compare our observations, perhaps collaborate on a paper for one of the scientific journals." She smiled slightly. "I promise the work will be worth your time, and I pay well for quality specimens." Gabriel knew he was making excuses to stay, that the logical choice was to head out while the weather held and the trails were clear. But logic seemed a distant concern when Victoria was looking at him like that, her green eyes reflecting the moonlight. "A few days," he agreed. But only if you let me help with your research. I am not much of a writer, but I can assist with the practical work. That would be wonderful. The next 3 days passed in a blur of scientific collaboration and growing connection. Gabriel brought his remaining specimens to Victoria's laboratory, and together they catalogued each one, documenting the circumstances of discovery and the physical properties. Victoria taught him to use the microscope and showed him the chemical tests that could identify different mineral compositions. Gabriel shared his extensive notes on meteorite falls, years of observations that Victoria found invaluable. But it was the conversations between the work that Gabriel treasured most. He learned that Victoria had defied her family's expectations by refusing to marry the Boston banker they had selected for her, choosing instead to honor her father's memory by continuing his scientific work. She spoke of feeling trapped in a world that valued her only for her marriageability, not her mind. Coming here was like breathing for the first time, she told him on the third afternoon, as they sat reviewing their notes. No one in Taylorsville cares that I am unmarried at 24. They barely care that I am a woman doing scientific work. I can simply be Victoria Jennings, collector and researcher. 24 is hardly unmarried, Gabriel protested. You make it sound as though you are ancient, Victoria laughed. In Boston society, I am practically a spinster. My mother despaired of me. Then Boston society is foolish. The words came out more vehement than Gabriel intended. Any man would be fortunate to. He stopped, suddenly aware of the line he was about to cross. But Victoria was looking at him with an expression that made his heart race. Any man? She asked softly. Gabriel set down the notebook he had been holding. They were alone in the laboratory, the afternoon sun slanting through the windows, dust motes dancing in the golden light. Victoria, I know we have only just met. I know I have no right to speak of such things. But these past few days with you have been the finest of my life. They have been wonderful, Victoria agreed, her voice barely above a whisper. I find myself inventing reasons to stay in Taylorsville, to see you again tomorrow and the day after that. Gabriel stood, moving closer to where she sat. I have spent years searching the sky for wonders, but I never thought to find someone who could see the world as I do. Victoria rose to meet him, closing the distance between them until they stood mere inches apart. I feel the same, she said. From the moment you arrived, covered in trail dust and carrying that meteorite like it was precious treasure, I felt something shift, as though the universe had delivered you to my doorstep. May I kiss you? Gabriel asked, his voice rough with emotion. In answer, Victoria reached up and pulled him down to her. Their lips met, tentative at first, then with growing certainty. Gabriel wrapped his arms around her, feeling her melt against him, and knew with absolute conviction that he had found something far more precious than any meteorite. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Victoria rested her forehead against his chest. What are we going to do? She asked. You have your work, your searches across the territory. I have my laboratory here. Gabriel tipped her chin up so he could look into her eyes. We will find a way. If there is one thing I have learned from chasing meteorites, it is that the most valuable discoveries are worth any effort to obtain. That is rather romantic for a scientist, Victoria teased, but her eyes were bright with unshed tears. I never claimed to be only a scientist. Gabriel kissed her again, more gently this time. Victoria Jennings, I know this is sudden. I know I am not wealthy or particularly respectable. I spend most of my time sleeping on hard ground and digging in the dirt. But I am falling in love with you, and I think you might be falling in love with me, and I cannot simply ride away and pretend this never happened. No, Victoria agreed, her hands resting on his chest. "You cannot, because I am falling in love with you, Gabriel Garrison. Desperately, illogically, wonderfully in love with you." They stood holding each other as the sun sank lower, painting the laboratory walls with amber light. Eventually, practical concerns reasserted themselves. Gabriel still had a livelihood to maintain, and Victoria's research required specimens he was uniquely qualified to find. But now they had a shared purpose, a reason to build something together. "What if we combined our efforts?" Victoria proposed, ever the practical scientist. "You continue to search for meteorites, but you make Taylorsville your base. Store your equipment here in my laboratory. When you are out on a hunt, I can analyze the specimens you have already brought. When you return, we work together on the documentation and research." "And I get to see you as often as possible," Gabriel added. "There is that benefit as well," Victoria smiled. "I could even accompany you on some of the searches when the terrain is not too difficult. I have never witnessed a fresh meteorite fall." The idea of sharing his searches with someone, of not being alone under the vast sky, filled Gabriel with a joy he had not known he was missing. "I would like that. I would like that very much." Over the following weeks, they established a new routine. Gabriel took a room at the boarding house, where Mrs. Palmer kept a motherly eye on the budding romance. He spent his mornings helping Victoria with her research, and his afternoons preparing for the next expedition. They took meals together, walked the streets of Taylorsville in the evening cool, and talked endlessly about their shared passion for the cosmos. The townspeople of Taylorsville watched the courtship with interest. Gabriel was an unknown quantity, a wanderer who chased falling stars, but he was respectful and clearly devoted to Miss Jennings. Victoria had been alone since arriving in town, and folks generally thought it was about time someone caught her eye. Mrs. Palmer made her approval obvious, offering her best rooms to Gabriel at a discount, and making sure Victoria's reputation remained untarnished by always insisting on proper chaperoning. 6 weeks after their first meeting, Gabriel planned his next major expedition. Reports had come in of a spectacular meteor shower visible from northern Arizona territory, and several ranchers had reported finding unusual stones in their fields. It was too good an opportunity to miss, but Gabriel found himself reluctant to leave Victoria even for the week or two the trip would require. "Go," Victoria urged him, even as she held his hands tightly. "This is important work, and I will be here when you return." "Come with me," Gabriel said impulsively. "The terrain is rough, but you are strong. We could camp under the stars, and you could see firsthand how I track the falls." Victoria's face lit up with excitement, but then reality intruded. "Gabriel, we are not married. I cannot simply ride off into the wilderness with you, no matter how much I might wish to. The talk would destroy both our reputations." He knew she was right, but the knowledge sat bitter in his chest. The conventions that governed proper behavior seemed ridiculous when weighed against the intensity of his feelings. "Then marry me," he said. Victoria went very still. "What? Marry me?" Gabriel repeated, sinking to one knee on the laboratory floor. "I know it has only been 6 weeks. I know I should wait, court you properly, ask permission from relatives you do not even like. But Victoria, I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you. I want to spend my days searching the heavens with you at my side and my nights holding you close. Marry me, and we can build a life together studying the wonders of the universe." Tears were streaming down Victoria's face now, but she was smiling. "Yes," she said, pulling him to his feet. "Yes, Gabriel, I will marry you." They kissed with the joy of it, of having found each other against all odds in this vast territory. When they finally parted, Victoria was laughing through her tears. "I need to tell Mrs. Palmer," she said. "She will want to help organize everything. And we should speak to Reverend Thomas at the church." "Oh, Gabriel, are you certain? You are not just saying this so I can accompany you on your expedition." "I am saying this because I cannot imagine my future without you in it," Gabriel said firmly. "The expedition can wait. Let us marry first, properly and publicly. Then we can search for meteorites together as husband and wife." The wedding took place 3 weeks later in the small church at the center of Taylorsville. Victoria wore a simple but elegant dress of cream-colored silk, her hair adorned with desert wildflowers. Gabriel wore his best suit, purchased new for the occasion with some of the money Victoria had paid him for specimens. Mrs. Palmer wept openly through the ceremony, and most of the town turned out to witness Miss Jennings marrying her meteorite hunter. Gabriel spoke his vows with a steady voice, looking into Victoria's eyes as he promised to love and cherish her for all his days. When Victoria repeated her own vows, her voice clear and certain, he felt the rightness of it settle into his bones. This was his destiny, written in the stars long before they met. They honeymooned in Victoria's house, which she had purchased shortly after arriving in Taylorsville. It was a comfortable adobe structure with thick walls that kept out the summer heat, located on the edge of town with a clear view of the night sky. Victoria had converted one room into a bedroom observatory, with star charts on the walls and the smaller telescope positioned by the window. Their first night together as husband and wife, they made love with the tenderness of new lovers learning each other's bodies, then lay wrapped in each other's arms watching the stars through the window. Gabriel traced the constellation patterns on Victoria's bare shoulder, naming each one while she told him the myths behind the names. "I used to lie alone in my father's study," Victoria murmured, "looking at these same stars and wondering if I would ever find someone who could see them as I do. Not just as distant lights, but as questions waiting to be answered." "I know exactly what you mean," Gabriel said, kissing her temple. "I spent so many nights alone, thinking I was the only person in the world who cared about rocks falling from the sky." "We are not alone anymore," Victoria said, turning to face him. "We have each other now." They made love again, slower this time, savoring every touch and whisper. Afterward, Gabriel felt a completeness he had never experienced before. This was what he had been searching for all along, though he had not known it until Victoria appeared in his life. The next morning, they began planning their first expedition as a married couple. Victoria's excitement was palpable as they packed supplies, selected instruments, and mapped their route. Gabriel taught her the basics of campcraft, how to pack efficiently and travel light. Victoria approached it with her characteristic thoroughness, making lists and checking off items. "You realize we will be sleeping on the ground," Gabriel teased as she packed a fourth notebook. "I am aware," Victoria replied with dignity. "But if we make significant discoveries, I want to document them properly. Science requires meticulous record keeping." They set out on a bright September morning, leading 2 horses laden with equipment. Gabriel had chosen a route that would take them through the area where the meteor shower had been most visible, stopping at ranches where stones had reportedly been found. It was not the most challenging terrain, out of deference to Victoria's inexperience with wilderness travel, but it would give her a taste of his life on the trail. The first night camping under the stars, Gabriel worried that Victoria might find the accommodations too rough, but she surprised him by diving into the experience with enthusiasm. She helped gather firewood, attempted to cook their dinner with mixed results, and declared the bedroll on the hard ground perfectly comfortable as long as Gabriel was beside her. "Look," she said, pointing upward as they lay together after the fire had died down. "There, did you see it? A meteor." Make a wish, Gabriel said, pulling her closer. I have everything I wished for already, Victoria replied, snuggling against him, but I will wish for many more nights like this. They found 3 small meteorites over the next week, each discovery sending Victoria into raptures of scientific excitement. Gabriel taught her to recognize the subtle signs of an impact, the scorching and the depression in the earth, the scatter pattern of fragments. Victoria documented everything with careful sketches and detailed notes, already thinking about the paper they would write together. On their 5th night out, they camped near a spring in a small canyon. Gabriel had visited this spot before and knew it to be safe and beautiful, with ancient petroglyphs carved into the red rock walls. After they had eaten, Victoria wandered over to study the rock art, tracing the spiral patterns and animal figures with gentle fingers. Someone stood here hundreds of years ago, she said softly, looking at the same stars we see, wondering about the same mysteries. Gabriel joined her, wrapping his arms around her from behind. Perhaps they saw a meteorite fall and carved it into the rock. Look there, that spiral with the tail could be a falling star. I love how you see the world, Victoria said, leaning back against him. Everything is connected to the cosmos for you. Everything is connected to the cosmos, Gabriel corrected. We are made of star stuff, you and I. The iron in our blood came from some ancient supernova. When I hold you, I am holding the universe itself. Victoria turned in his arms and kissed him deeply. They made love that night under the vast Arizona sky, surrounded by the ancient art of people long gone, and Gabriel felt part of something eternal and beautiful. They returned to Taylorsville 2 weeks after they had left, sunburned and dusty and utterly happy. Their saddlebags held 5 new meteorite specimens, and Victoria's notebooks were full of observations. Mrs. Palmer clucked over their weathered appearance, but clearly approved of how the expedition had brought them even closer together. Over the following months, Gabriel and Victoria established a rhythm to their life. Gabriel would make 2 or 3 expeditions per season, sometimes alone when the terrain was too dangerous, sometimes with Victoria when conditions permitted. Between trips, they worked side by side in the laboratory, analyzing specimens and writing papers for the scientific journals back east. Victoria's name was already known in academic circles thanks to her father's reputation. But now, V. Jennings and G. Garrison began appearing on research papers that advanced the understanding of meteorite composition and celestial mechanics. Their marriage deepened with each passing season. They learned each other's habits and quirks, had their first fights and first reconciliations, discovered the 1,000 small intimacies that bind 2 lives together. Gabriel learned that Victoria was grumpy before her morning coffee, and that she liked to read in bed by candlelight. Victoria learned that Gabriel had nightmares sometimes about being lost in the desert, and that he sang old trail songs while working. In the spring of 1884, Victoria discovered she was pregnant. She told Gabriel one evening as they sat together reviewing their latest findings, simply setting down her pen and saying, "I am going to have a baby." Gabriel stared at her, the words taking a moment to penetrate. Then joy flooded through him, so intense it was almost painful. Truly, truly. Victoria was smiling, but he could see nervousness in her eyes. "I know this will complicate things. I will not be able to accompany you on expeditions once I start showing. The laboratory work will need to slow down as I get further along." "Victoria," Gabriel interrupted, taking her hands. "This is wonderful news, the most wonderful news." He pulled her into his arms, feeling her relax against him. "We will manage everything. You can continue your research here while I do the field work, and once the baby comes, we will adjust again. You are not disappointed." Victoria asked, her voice muffled against his chest. Disappointed. I am overjoyed. Gabriel pulled back so he could see her face. We are going to have a child, Victoria. A little person who is half you and half me. How could I be anything but thrilled? Victoria's eyes were bright with tears. I am terrified, she admitted. My mother died in childbirth with my younger brother. He died too. What if something goes wrong? Gabriel felt a chill of fear, but he pushed it down, focusing on being strong for her. We will get the best doctor, take every precaution. You are strong and healthy, Victoria, and I will be with you every step of the way. Promise, she whispered. Promise, he said firmly, sealing it with a kiss. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer months. Victoria continued her laboratory work, though Gabriel insisted she not overexert herself. He curtailed his expeditions, staying closer to home, unwilling to be more than a day's ride away. The townspeople of Taylorsville were delighted by the news, with Mrs. Palmer in particular appointing herself as an unofficial grandmother, bringing over remedies for morning sickness and hand-knitted baby clothes. In late October, as the desert heat finally broke into autumn cool, Victoria went into labor. Gabriel stayed by her side throughout, holding her hand and wiping her brow, whispering encouragement, even as his own fear threatened to overwhelm him. The hours stretched endlessly, and he found himself praying to whatever power guided the stars across the sky, begging for Victoria and the baby to be safe. Finally, as dawn light began to filter through the windows, a baby's cry pierced the air. The doctor, a competent man brought in from the nearest large town, smiled wearily. Congratulations, Mr. Garrison, you have a son. Gabriel looked down at Victoria, who was exhausted but smiling, and felt tears streaming down his face. A son, he repeated wonderingly. They named him Thomas Gabriel Garrison, after Victoria's father. He was a healthy baby with his mother's green eyes and a powerful set of lungs. Gabriel held his son for the first time and felt his world realign around this tiny person, this perfect combination of himself and the woman he loved. The first months of parenthood were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. They took turns walking the floor with Thomas when he cried at night, learned to function on interrupted sleep, marveled at every small milestone. Victoria proved to be a devoted mother, though she chafed at how the baby's demands left little time for her research. I love him desperately, she told Gabriel one evening as they both sat bleary-eyed, Thomas finally asleep between them. But I miss the work. I miss using my mind for something beyond feeding schedules and diaper changes. Then we will find a way for you to work again, Gabriel said. Mrs. Palmer has been hinting that she would love to watch Thomas sometimes, and I can take him with me on local trips once he is a bit older. Victoria looked at him with such love that it took his breath away. How did I find you? She asked softly. A meteorite fell from the sky, Gabriel replied, equally soft, and changed both our lives. As Thomas grew into a curious toddler, they adapted their work around his needs. Victoria resumed her research in the laboratory, with Mrs. Palmer watching the boy a few hours each day. Gabriel took shorter expeditions, and when Thomas turned 3, he began bringing the boy along on local searches. Thomas loved riding in front of his father, looking for the special rocks that fell from the sky. In the summer of 1887, when Thomas was nearly 4, Victoria discovered she was pregnant again. This time there was less fear and more joy, confidence born of having survived the experience once. Their daughter, Elizabeth Victoria Garrison, arrived the following spring with far less drama than her brother, a calm baby who seemed content to observe the world around her with solemn eyes. Gabriel held his daughter and looked at his family, at Victoria nursing their baby while Thomas climbed over his father's lap to peer at his new sister, and felt a gratitude so profound it was almost prayer. He had set out years ago to chase falling stars, never imagining that his search would lead him to this woman, this life, these children. The years passed in the comfortable rhythm of family life punctuated by scientific discovery. Gabriel continued to track meteorite falls across the territory, sometimes alone, sometimes with Victoria when the children could be left with Mrs. Palmer, and eventually with both children in tow as they grew old enough for travel. Thomas showed his mother's scientific bent, asking endless questions about the stars and the stones. Elizabeth was quieter but equally curious, preferring to sketch the meteorites rather than analyze them. By 1890, Gabriel and Victoria's collection had become famous in scientific circles. Researchers from universities back east wrote requesting samples for their own studies. The Garrison Jennings collection, as it became known, represented one of the most comprehensive catalogs of meteorite types in the country. Victoria published papers that advanced the understanding of solar system formation, while Gabriel's techniques for predicting meteorite falls became the standard method taught to aspiring collectors. Arizona achieved statehood in 1912, by which time Gabriel and Victoria had spent nearly 30 years together. Their children were grown, Thomas pursuing his own scientific career in astronomy at the University of California, Elizabeth married to a geologist and living in New Mexico. Gabriel's hair had gone silver, and Victoria wore reading glasses for her close work, but their passion for their research and for each other had not dimmed. They still took expeditions together when a promising lead came in, though they traveled more slowly now, taking time to enjoy the desert wildflowers and the spectacular sunsets. They still spent evenings in the laboratory, analyzing new finds and debating theories. And they still slept wrapped in each other's arms, though now they treasured the peace of it rather than the passion, the deep comfort of 3 decades shared. One evening in the spring of 1913, they sat together on the porch of their home, watching the stars emerge as twilight deepened. They were both in their 50s now, their life's work largely complete, the collection that had brought them together now housed in a proper museum building that Victoria had funded and Gabriel had designed. "You ever regret it?" Victoria asked, her head resting on Gabriel's shoulder. "All those years ago, when you chose to stay in Taylorsville rather than continue your wandering?" Gabriel considered the question, looking back across the decades. He thought of all the meteorites he had found, the papers they had published, the contributions they had made to human understanding of the cosmos. But more than that, he thought of morning coffee with Victoria, of teaching Thomas to identify meteor showers, of Elizabeth's wedding day, of 1,000 small perfect moments that comprised a life well lived. "Not for an instant," he said, kissing the top of her head. "I came here to deliver a meteorite to a collector. Instead, I found my destiny." Victoria tilted her face up to his, and he saw in her eyes the same love that had bloomed in that laboratory so many years ago, deeper now and more complex, but essentially unchanged. "As did I," she said softly. They kissed as the first stars appeared, 2 people who had built a life from shared wonder, and discovered that the greatest miracle was not written in the heavens but held in each other's arms. The desert breeze carried the scent of creosote and sage. The night birds called their evening songs, and somewhere above the atmosphere, meteors traced their burning paths across the darkness, eternal and beautiful. Gabriel and Victoria continued their work into their later years, though they gradually shifted from active field research to mentoring the next generation of meteorite hunters and analysts. Young scientists made pilgrimages to Taylorsville to study their collection and learn from their methods. Gabriel particularly enjoyed taking promising students out into the field, teaching them to read the sky and track the falls. Victoria ran what had become an informal academy from the original laboratory, now expanded several times to accommodate her growing collection of specimens and instruments. Thomas visited frequently with his wife and their 2 children, bringing new astronomical data that might predict future meteor showers. Elizabeth and her husband sent rock samples from their geological surveys, occasionally finding meteorites among them that Gabriel could identify by sight alone after so many years of study. In 1918, the Spanish flu swept through Arizona, and both Gabriel and Victoria fell ill. They nursed each other through the fever, taking turns being strong when the other was weak, just as they had done throughout their marriage. They survived, though Gabriel's lungs were weakened, and Victoria developed a persistent cough. The experience reminded them of their mortality, of the finite nature of time. "We should write our memoirs," Victoria suggested during their recovery. "Document not just the scientific discoveries, but the life we built together, for Thomas and Elizabeth, for their children." So they spent the following year writing their story, sitting together at the big desk in the laboratory, taking turns with the pen, arguing good-naturedly about the details of their early courtship. Gabriel insisted that Victoria had smiled at him first that day on the porch. Victoria maintained that Gabriel had been staring at her in a most improper way. They laughed over the memories, occasionally pausing to kiss or simply hold hands, grateful for every moment they had been given. The memoir was published in 1920 by a scientific press, titled "Following the Stars: A Scientific Partnership." It became unexpectedly popular, appealing to both the scientific community and to regular readers who were charmed by the love story woven through the astronomical observations and meteorite catalogs. Victoria was interviewed by women's magazines as an example of female achievement in science. Gabriel found himself an unlikely romantic hero, the cowboy who had literally delivered the stars to his beloved. They enjoyed the attention but were glad when it faded, and they could return to their quiet life in Taylorsville. The town had grown over the decades, the mines expanding and then contracting, new businesses arriving, but their home on the edge of town remained a constant, the laboratory a landmark that tourists sometimes visited. On their 40th wedding anniversary in 1923, the town threw them a celebration. The whole community turned out, along with former students and fellow scientists who traveled from across the country. Thomas and Elizabeth organized the event, presenting their parents with a specially commissioned telescope, far more powerful than any they had owned before. Gabriel and Victoria, both in their 60s now, stood before the assembled crowd and renewed their wedding vows. Gabriel's voice was not as steady as it had been 40 years ago, and Victoria's hands trembled slightly as she held his, but the love in their words made many in the audience weep. "I came to Arizona territory chasing meteorites," Gabriel said in his speech after the ceremony. "I thought I was searching for rocks from space, for scientific specimens to study, but the universe had other plans. It led me to Victoria, and in finding her, I found my true purpose. Every meteorite I ever discovered pales in comparison to the wonder of sharing my life with this remarkable woman." Victoria responded with her own speech, her voice clear despite her lingering cough. "My father taught me to look at the stars with curiosity and wonder. But it was Gabriel who taught me that the greatest discoveries are not made in laboratories or written in academic journals. They are made in the quiet moments between two people who truly see each other, who build a life together stone by stone, day by day, with love as their foundation. They danced together that night, slowly and carefully, surrounded by family and friends and the desert stars they had spent a lifetime studying. Gabriel held Victoria close, feeling how fragile she had become in recent years, how the illness had taken its toll. But in his arms, she was still the vibrant young woman who had stood on that laboratory porch in 1883, shading her eyes against the sun as she waited for a dusty traveler to deliver her latest specimen. "I love you," he whispered in her ear as they swayed to the music. "I love you too," Victoria replied. "Thank you for finding me. Thank you for being worth finding." They continued working into their 70s, though at a gentler pace. Gabriel could no longer make the long expeditions into rough country, but he could still identify a meteorite by its weight and texture, could still calculate fall patterns from witness reports. Victoria's eyesight was failing, but she could still analyze chemical compositions and dictate papers for Elizabeth to transcribe. In the summer of 1928, a spectacular meteor shower lit up the skies over Arizona. Gabriel and Victoria, now 70 and 68 respectively, sat together in their bedroom observatory watching the display. Hundreds of shooting stars streaked across the darkness, a celestial celebration more magnificent than anything they had seen in decades of observation. "Remember our first expedition together?" Victoria asked, her hand finding Gabriel's in the darkness. "You showed me how to track the meteors, how to predict where they might land." "You were terrible at making camp coffee," Gabriel teased gently. "I have not improved much," Victoria admitted. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the light show above. "Gabriel, I need to tell you something." Something in her tone made Gabriel's chest tighten with worry. "What is it?" "The doctor says my lungs are worse. The damage from the influenza combined with age. He gives me perhaps a year, maybe less." Victoria's voice was calm, matter-of-fact, the same tone she used when discussing scientific data. Gabriel felt the world tilt beneath him. "No," he said simply. "We will get another opinion, a better doctor, whatever treatment is needed." "Gabriel." Victoria squeezed his hand. "We are scientists. We deal in facts. The fact is that I am dying, slowly perhaps, but certainly. I need you to accept this." "I cannot." Gabriel's voice broke. "I cannot lose you, Victoria. You are my whole world." "Not your whole world," Victoria corrected gently. "You have Thomas and Elizabeth, your grandchildren. You have your work, your legacy. You have had me for 45 years, which is more than many people get. We have been blessed, my love." Gabriel pulled her into his arms, feeling her body shake with coughs even as she tried to comfort him. Above them, the meteors continued their ancient dance, indifferent to human joy or sorrow. Victoria lived for another 18 months, gradually weakening but remaining mentally sharp until near the end. Gabriel cared for her with fierce devotion, reading to her when her eyes were too tired, helping her with correspondence when her hands shook too much to write. Thomas and Elizabeth came often, bringing the grandchildren to brighten her days. In her final weeks, Victoria insisted on being moved to the laboratory one last time. Gabriel arranged a comfortable bed where she could see the specimens they had collected together, could look at the charts and instruments that had defined their life's work. "Tell me the story again," she asked one afternoon, her voice barely above a whisper. "About the first meteorite you brought me." Gabriel settled beside her bed, holding her frail hand. "It was July of 1883, he began. I had ridden for 4 days through Arizona territory to deliver a meteorite to a collector named Jennings. I expected to find a gentleman scientist, perhaps some wealthy eccentric. Instead, I found you." Victoria smiled, her eyes closed. "I was waiting on the porch." You were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen, Gabriel continued, his voice thick with emotion. You stood there in your blue dress with the chalk dust on your apron, and I knew in that instant that my life was about to change. Did you really know? Victoria asked. Right away. Right away, Gabriel confirmed. The meteorite brought me to you, but destiny kept me there. Every moment since has been a gift. Victoria squeezed his hand weakly. No regrets, only that I cannot keep you longer. You will keep me, Victoria said. In every meteorite you look at, in every star chart, in Thomas's eyes and Elizabeth's smile. I will be there, Gabriel. Always. She died peacefully 3 days later in the early morning hours, with Gabriel holding her hand and their children at her bedside. Her last words were, "The stars are beautiful tonight," though clouds covered the sky and she could not possibly have seen them. Gabriel buried his beloved Victoria in the Taylorsville Cemetery, on a hillside with a clear view of the sky. Her headstone read, Victoria Jennings Garrison, scientist, mother, beloved wife. She followed the stars. The funeral was attended by hundreds, scientists and townspeople and family, all come to pay respects to a woman who had lived her life with curiosity and courage. In the months after Victoria's death, Gabriel found himself unmoored, going through the motions of daily life without real purpose. He continued to live in their house, surrounded by her things, but the laboratory felt empty without her presence. Thomas and Elizabeth worried about him, seeing how he seemed to age years in mere months. It was his grandson, Victoria's namesake Victor, who finally reached him. The boy was 12, fascinated by astronomy like his grandfather Thomas. He came to stay with Gabriel for the summer of 1930, and his endless questions and enthusiasm slowly drew the old man back to life. "Grandfather, teach me to find meteorites," Victor demanded one morning. "Like you taught father, like you and grandmother did together." Gabriel looked at his grandson's eager face and felt something in his chest loosen. Victoria would not want him to simply give up, to let their work die with her. She would want him to pass it on, to ensure that the next generation carried the torch. "Very well," he said, "but it is not easy work. You must be patient and observant and willing to sleep on the hard ground." "I can do all that," Victor assured him. So Gabriel taught his grandson as he had once taught his own children, sharing the techniques he had developed over 5 decades of searching the skies. They made expeditions into the desert, camping under the stars, and Gabriel told stories of the great finds he and Victoria had made together. Talking about her, remembering their adventures, brought her back to life in his heart. Gabriel lived for another 8 years after Victoria's death, long enough to see Victor enter university to study astronomy, long enough to watch his great-grandchildren toddle around the laboratory that had been his and Victoria's sanctuary. He continued to catalog specimens and correspond with scientists, though he no longer traveled far from Taylorsville. On a clear night in October of 1938, Gabriel died quietly in his sleep at the age of 80. He was found the next morning by his housekeeper, lying peacefully in the bed he had shared with Victoria for so many years, a photograph of her clutched in his hand. His face wore an expression of such serenity that those who saw him said he looked like a man who had found his way home. Thomas and Elizabeth buried their father next to their mother on the hillside cemetery. His headstone read, Gabriel Garrison, meteorite hunter, father, devoted husband. He delivered the stars. During the funeral, Victor stood and spoke about his grandfather's legacy, about the collection that bore his name, about the love story that had inspired so many. "My grandfather once told me," Victor said to the assembled mourners, "that he came to Arizona Territory searching for rocks from space. But he found something far more precious. He found my grandmother, and together they built a life dedicated to wonder and discovery. Their love showed me that the greatest adventures are not the ones we take alone, but the ones we share with the people who truly see us. The Garrison Jennings meteorite collection remains in Taylorsville to this day, housed in a modern museum building funded by their children and grandchildren. The original laboratory has been preserved exactly as it was in 1883, when a dusty cowboy first delivered a meteorite to a brilliant young woman and changed both their lives forever. Visitors to the museum can see the first meteorite Gabriel brought to Victoria, carefully labeled with the date and location of discovery. They can read the love letters exchanged during Gabriel's expeditions, scientific observations interwoven with professions of devotion. They can view the charts and instruments the couple used, the photographs of them working side by side, the memoir they wrote together in their later years. But perhaps the most popular exhibit is a simple display case near the entrance. It holds two worn wedding bands, Gabriel's and Victoria's, placed side by side on a bed of velvet. The plaque beneath reads, "He came to deliver meteorites. She was the collector and his destiny. Together they reached for the stars and found each other." And on clear nights, when the desert sky blazes with the light of distant suns and meteors trace their burning paths through the darkness, some say you can still feel their presence in Taylorsville. Two souls united by love and curiosity, forever chasing the wonders of the cosmos together, their search complete, their hearts finally home.